1.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Milton School Committee meeting for December 4th, 2024. I will call this meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, in approving our agenda for this evening, does anybody know of any changes or things that we have here that we won't be talking about this evening? Okay. The only change I'm aware of, which we can talk further about when we get to it, is that we are not planning to actually take a vote on this evening's discussion of the calendar. We'll discuss that, and then we'll aim to bring that vote at our next meeting in 2 weeks. But other than that, if there are no other changes, then we can move into public comment, which is our first main agenda item. So typically with public comment, we welcome members of the community to join and share their perspectives with us. They can do that either online or in person. I believe we have someone in person who intends to participate in public comment. Do we have anybody online? If you're online and would like to participate, can you please raise your hand at this time? Okay. Don't see any hands raised on online for public comment. So in that case, we can begin with our guest in the audience here tonight. Rabbi Benjamin, thank you for coming.
Good evening. Fred Benjamin. I live at 29 Winthrop Street here in Milton since 2007. And I happen to also be the rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom of the Blue Hills. I want to thank the representatives of the school committee who came today to meet with all of the Milton Interfaith Clergy Association, where I happen to also be the treasurer. And it was a very open and honest, and as we said, we don't envy you at all. But there are a few things that after that meeting I just wanted to share. There's really two things. The first is the desire to be very transparent about how the calendar actually is right now. And I think it's fair to say that if you really take a look at the calendar, and Selena, if I can call you that first name.
Sure.
Right now, and in past years, there are 3 holidays that are observed during the calendar year, if they fall on school days, that are taken off. The first is Christmas Day. Now, of course, Christmas is also a national holiday, so it gets both. And we do know that, George Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas Day, but I doubt that anyone uses that as the national reason for the holiday. The other day that's observed is Good Friday. And the last one I want to mention is December 24th. And as Selena mentioned, December 24th is a very important holiday from a spiritual point of view, which I think is wonderful to get ready for Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve is a really important religious experience. So just want to be very upfront to say right now there are 3 days. Now granted, as I said, Christmas is double dipping, but still its origins are for religious reasons. So that's my first point. The second is I'd like to just say something about Thanksgiving, which all of us, I hope, had the chance to enjoy with family. So I'm sure like many of you, I traveled and visited family. And at that wonderful dinner, we had the traditional fare. We had a turkey, we had stuffing, we had delicious cranberry relish. Ours was a kosher turkey, but that menu doesn't work for everyone because we have members of our families who are allergic to gluten. We have people who are allergic to nuts, soy. We have people who are vegetarian. Sometimes there are two turkeys, right? There's a kosher turkey and there's a regular turkey that you get in the store. So there's this reality that we have people who have different needs. And when the hosts accommodate for that, we know that it's inconvenient to do it. It's absolutely inconvenient to make these adjustments, but we make them because we want those people to be welcomed at the table. We want them to know that we care for them. And so these accommodations, these are, let's face it, they're annoying, right? They're not fun to do, but we go out of our way because we care. And we care about them because we want to show our love for them. And so I really think that when we're considering this particular issue, is we want to be able to say that you too are welcome at the table. And we're going to show that by accepting the idea of being inconvenienced, by embracing the idea that I'm ready to be inconvenienced to show that you're there, who you are as who you are matters, and we care about you because we want you at the table.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing that, and it helps inform the discussion that we're going to have, that we have been having, that we'll continue to have this evening. So, thank you. I'm just making sure there's no one else online who would like to participate in public comment. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, so we will be able to proceed then in our agenda, and the next item is the superintendent's report.
Great. So we've only had about a week of school since we last met because we had a break in between. So I just have two things tonight to share. One is a little bit more information on our assistant superintendent of teaching and learning hire. So our structure for that is going to be an initial screening committee, and then we're going to have a second kind of final group, which is going to be me and Katie and Lizzie, which I thought made sense as the kind of like the second tier of this process. Part of the screening committee will have one school committee member, so that's something for you all to decide in terms of who would like to be on the screening committee. That is being led by Danielle and by Regina. So we have sent something out. We're starting to collect names on a Google form. It's probably easier, and you can speak to this with the committee in terms of how you want to go about selecting a member to be on that screening committee. It closes on the 2nd. There's going to be one meeting prior to break to talk through kind of the vision for the position, maybe some anti-bias training, and kind of be ready when it closes to get right at it instead of having a meeting in January to do all that kind of prep. So it will probably be 4 or 5 meetings, I think, in total in terms of a commitment.
Are those dates set already for the screening committee meetings?
Or tentative dates?
I was going to say they're tentatively set, yeah. When is the December date?
December, Tuesday.
It's the last week. Yeah, it's the last week before break.
So if it would be possible, I mean, one thing I'm thinking about would just be if we could, maybe if we could get the dates that have been tentatively set,
Yep.
that may help like people decide whether they want to be available and considered to be on that committee. Mm-hmm. And so maybe if you can send the dates to us,
You want to send those?
then
Okay.
anybody who sees those dates and says, yes, I would be available for those meetings and I am interested in serving, can you just maybe let me know? And if there's more than one person, we will figure out what to do with that. But does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so that's the first thing, and I shared previously in our last meeting that this position is not the combined position, it's just the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, not the HR combined with it. Second thing I wanted to share is we are 2 out of 6 through our teaching and learning sessions. We had our second one at the high school on Monday, which was great. It's been really nice to bring people in who are, and not like present at people, but to have conversation. It's I think an opportunity for principals that they normally don't have, because it seems like the thing that's most important for us to talk about, we don't talk about, which is teaching and learning. We tend to get more into an operational mindset. We talk about like, you first do this, then do this. Here's our course selection if you're a high school parent. So you're constantly getting information, but there really aren't that many opportunities to, as a parent, I think, to engage around teaching and learning. So that's just something I've been reflecting on that's been pretty cool about this. We have, as I mentioned, we've done 2 next Monday at Pierce, and then in January, our Collycott, Glover, and Cunningham. Those are my 2 updates.
Thank you. Any questions for Peter? No. All right.
All right, thank
So next is the chair's report, and I'm going to share one update, which is mainly for the community since we were all there. But it's about our governance retreat that took place prior to Thanksgiving. I don't know if it was 1 or 2 weeks. I don't know when it was. It was November 25th.
9 days ago?
Okay. And so it was another really great retreat. We have been doing these about quarterly. And they're an opportunity for us to take a step back, consider our work as a committee, our ongoing collaboration with Dr. Burrows and your team. We always start our retreats by just having dinner together and building community that way, and taking time to just catch up on each other's lives, etc. In terms of the actual substance of our governance retreat, I'll share some of the key takeaways for folks to know what it is we use that time to do. The first thing we did was just did some reflection and discussion on the progress we see ourselves making toward the goals for this year that we developed over the summer and approved as a school committee in September. And we identified that a number of these goals are like on track and we're making good progress. And specifically the ones that we think are going well and on track include maintaining a collaborative relationship with the superintendent, that we are holding these quarterly governance-focused discussion meetings that include checking in on our goals to reflect on progress. We're on track because that's what we were doing. We're on track for completing successful renegotiation of contracts with our collective bargaining units because that process is just beginning to get underway, but we are on track with that at this point in the year. One of our goals will be to conduct evaluation of the superintendent. That's something that will be more of a focus for us as we approach the midpoint of the year and go into the next few months. The goal of securing financial and physical space resources as identified by the superintendent that are needed to fully execute the implementation plan and strategic plan. We have been making progress towards those goals. And a number of them are obviously still pending at this point in the year. So we were sort of noting that. We also were thinking about some of our goals that do require further attention, and these are things that we're going to be intentional about focusing on in the weeks and months ahead. Those include our goals around sort of monitoring data, the ongoing academic outcomes of historically underperforming groups within the system. We had some good discussion about, our processes as school committee members for identifying data, requesting data. That is something we're going to continue to refine in our governance discussions as we go forward. And thinking about setting a learning agenda for ourselves as school committee members that will allow us to meet that goal, as well as supporting the enhancement of effective instructional practices by implementing regular reviews of relevant student data. So those are making progress, and we're going to continue focusing on sort of how to actualize those goals for ourselves. We identified good progress in terms of our partnership with other leaders in town, especially a strong start so far in our partnership with the Warrant Committee, and beginning the process of working with the Select Board as well, which is in process. We talked a little bit about working with the superintendent to develop a school communication and community engagement strategy that supports the district priorities. We feel like we have done some good work in this area. The calendar process has been a focus of this work for us so far this fall, but we know we still need to focus on this in general. The budget will be another opportunity, an important topic for us to engage with the community around. So that is something that we'll be focusing on, obviously. And then, we also continued to think about sort of tactics we can use, how we can be more proactive about sharing updates in the district communications that go out to the community and so on. So that was a good discussion. The last part of the retreat, we did some good brainstorming around ideas for increasing transparency, which is something we've talked about and share a goal of doing that. We talked about, we have discussed this, of course, in the lengthy conversation around recording of subcommittee, whether or not to do that. We did talk about a sort of moving towards a more standardized process and template for minute taking for our subcommittees, which I think will be good to have more consistency and clarity about what model minutes include. We're going to sort of do some further research on that and work on that. We talked about posting our minutes for subcommittees, as well as the supplemental documents for subcommittee meetings. And those are both taking steps that we are not currently doing. These are all open records that are available for people to request, but to be more proactively transparent, we are going to move towards posting those on the website. We will need some time to sort of transition to that and put that into practice. But that was a good discussion leading to a shared understanding that we hope to move in that direction. And then we also talked about our subcommittee work in general and sort of how to ensure that our subcommittees are operating in the most efficient but really effective manner, in a way that feeds up into our full school committee work. And so that was, I think, a good discussion as well. And I just feel really thankful for our shared investment in this governance work, because I'm beginning to really see how valuable it is for helping us just do our work most effectively, and really appreciate everyone's thoughtful participation in that. So in terms of rounding out that update for the community. Is there anything anyone wants to add to that?
No.
Okay. So in that case, we can transition into the next item under my report, which is the calendar community outreach discussion. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, in sort of processing the information that we have to consider this evening through this discussion, and recognizing that there probably are still a few additional pieces of information that would be helpful for us to be able to consider. In talking with Peter and Selena, we've decided not to aim to vote tonight on this issue. We put it on there in case we would be ready to vote, because obviously we can always take it off, but we can't add a vote if we haven't had it on our agenda. We're not going to take a vote tonight. We're going to give ourselves one more 2-week period before our next meeting, and I do think that for the purpose of our timetable, in calendar development, it would be important that we can arrive at our recommendations 2 weeks from now at our next meeting. But just to put that out there, this is going to be a discussion. We'll all sort of share out what information we have from what we have each participated in. I'll be able to share a little bit more. Rabbi B referenced the meeting we had with Micah this morning, which was really fruitful. We'll kind of share a little bit about that and share a little bit about preliminary findings from the survey that we got from the community. And I guess I'll just start with opening up a debrief of our school-based listening sessions. So as everybody knows, so we won't do the survey piece until a little later. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think we should start by just sharing out from the listening sessions, because we all kind of spread out to do those, and we haven't yet had the opportunity to share with one another how they went, what we heard. And so I thought that would be a good place to start. And just for anyone who's listening that doesn't know, we did set up a series of 6 community listening sessions at our 6 different schools. People were invited to attend any session that worked for them with their schedule. What am I trying to say? They didn't have to go to the one at the school they attend. And also, by the way, we actually had 2 at the high school, because we had a morning and an evening in case an evening time would work better for anybody. And definitely really appreciate all of you we split up in pairs of school committee members, so there were 2 members at each of these sessions. And appreciate all the members of the community who did take time to come out and join those. And I think, like you were saying about the teaching and learning conversations, it's really nice to be in a different type of less formal space to meet with folks and hear from them. So that was, I think, positive. But I'd like to just open up, I don't know, should we go one by one? I know various of us have notes from the sessions that we attended. Some were much more more people came to than others. We did have a couple that nobody came to, which was fine. But we had others that a number of people did attend. So I'll stop there and just let people share what they heard at the different sessions.
I'm happy to jump in. I went to, the Tucker and then the Cunningham-Collicott joint session. There were 3, you were with me at Tucker, but there were 3 individuals who showed up at Tucker to talk about it. Honestly, most of the conversation there, we started talking about like other things that they were interested in talking about. We talked a little bit about calendar. Honestly, like some slight disagreement across those three folks in terms of June days versus August days. But I think there was general agreement that like creating consistency in terms of how the kind of holidays were being treated, the ones that are currently kind of getting days off and ones that are not, that was not the way forward, and that we should adjust that to make that more equitable across those different practices. So that was Tucker. Then Collicott Cunningham, Celine and I were at together. There were about 15 people there.
Yeah.
It was had a much stronger turnout. That we talked solely about the calendar. There was a lot of great back and forth, a lot of kind of different details. But I'd say overwhelmingly the feedback I heard from them was preference more to remove days rather than add days. Similar to Tucker, of that like we need to do something, like full recognition that like this current status quo is not treating everybody kind of equitably. But then when we talked about, okay, like what are the options here, vast majority, if not all of them, were in favor of kind of erring on the side of removing days from the calendar rather than adding additional days.
The only thing I would add to that is removing, so more inclined to remove because of the fear of extending the calendar, the year, the school year. So I don't think it was just removing because
For the sake of
removing, but it was more of like, if we add more, it's going to extend the school year. And so there was a lot of, I think, concern around extending the school year and what that meant on many different levels, right? The impact on families and sort of that quality time right before camps begin and that opportunity for families, and then also in terms of the buildings. Our buildings don't have AC, and so the longer the school year goes, the more uncomfortable it gets. So there was concern about that. So I think definitely there was an openness to removing if it meant keeping the school calendar, finishing more in the middle of June rather than towards the end of June.
Thanks.
So I can speak to Glover.
Sure, yeah.
So Lizzie and I went to Glover, and that one was well attended as well. I think we had about maybe 10 to 12 folks in the room, which was great. And there we heard a lot about then the desire for education, that not so much about whether to add or remove days, but what are we doing to make sure that our students understand why my peer may not be at school on this day, and why is that an important day for them. There was also a lot of mentioning around consistency, like they would like to see consistency around professional learning days, like when is that happening? So, and the impact that adding would have on professional learning, et cetera. So definitely that came up. There was a lot of concern about, and we've named it before in terms of practices within the different schools. Even if sort of the messaging from administration is that students are excused if they need to take a day, and that they should not be punished in any way. But that's not necessarily the way it's playing out for students in their experience, that if I miss practice, there might be a repercussion because I missed practice. And that students also, for some of them, they are torn when it comes to that, making that decision of whether I'm taking that day or not, because I'm not being part of the team. So how can we change practices so that students don't have that experience? That was very much stated. And I think, and how do we not miss out on learning time? I think that's also sort of understanding that if we add more days off, how are we going to make sure that students get the learning time that they need? Don't know what else you would add, Lizzie, from the conversation there.
Yeah, I think that was good. I think that it just speaks to this, which seems to be like a theme, and certainly at the two that I was part of, folks looking at this question like a little bit holistically, that the religious and cultural holidays are one element of the calendar, which has various moving parts, obviously, that impact both student learning as well as families' experiences of the calendar and how that impacts their lives. So, yeah, that a lot of those pieces were coming up for sure, and questions about professional learning time and the other holidays that we have contractually, which are not religious or cultural holidays, but which are the Friday before Labor Day and the Wednesday before Thanksgiving for main examples. So, yeah. Thanks.
I can start. I don't have all of my notes. So we had 3 people at the at Pierce, and I would say that the opinions ranged. Some didn't mind it because they would want a longer school year. Others disagreed and said they wanted a shorter school year. I mean, it was a great discussion. There was similarly things around, if we're choosing Jewish holidays, are we choosing the appropriate Jewish holidays? So it felt a little bit like we're giving one, but not the other. And sometimes I think it's based on when the calendar falls, because I think they're 10 days apart, so one would be on a weekend. But it sort of felt like it didn't feel well thought out necessarily as to how the Jewish holidays were being given. There was all similar talk about education in the sense of, is there the opportunity for schools to talk about why certain holiday, what the holidays are, why they exist, and are there opportunities for kids to talk about that at school, or the schools to talk about them? I'm trying to think if there's anything much different than.
Yeah, we talked. I think there was a little bit like, if we were to take away, like for instance, like Good Friday, like would there be like, would a lot of people be out that day?
Right.
So it's like, does it make sense? Like, do they come to expect it? I think you covered most of it.
Yeah.
We did have, there's only 3 people, and we did have a
and they
member
came
of the staff and Dr. Fish as well, which was really helpful just to kind of get their point of view. And it was like, it was the shorter school day. I mean, a shorter school year was what the preference was, but we definitely talked about some of the pushbacks that we could get, depending on certain days. We also talked about like ways where, as Amanda mentioned, like, how can we incorporate it in like, the emails that are sent out, like, do we, we touch on some of the holidays and what it means, and, we talked about like, like students represented in the building, like from different parts of the world, and like how do we kind of acknowledge that in small ways, right? We just kind of brainstormed some of those ideas, but it was kind of an interesting mix. Like we had both point of views on it, so that was really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was a great discussion, and it was actually nice that it was a small group,
Yeah,
but so it was just more just conversational. So it's good.
Thanks. So, as has been mentioned, another important sort of meeting in this initiative was the meeting that we were able to have this morning with members of MICA, and it was a really great discussion, opportunity to meet with a variety of the clergy and representatives of different faith and religious communities in town. It did include 2 representatives from Milton Muslim Neighbors, who, although there is no mosque in Milton, participate in MICA. And, as we all know, this, we have had the opportunity to be in conversation with some representatives of Milton Muslim Neighbors through this process. It was a good opportunity to hear from some of the other communities. And, thank you again, Rabbi Ivy, for being here tonight and for this morning. So I guess I'll just share like a couple takeaways that I had from the meeting, mainly, Anna, Mark, and Amanda, for you to hear, and then Peter and Selena can add on to that. But I think something that really was reinforced for me through the conversation was just the importance of this process that we are in, this importance of doing this community engagement, of gathering input from stakeholders, because of the complexity of this discussion. And that was something that surfaced in the conversation, was just a recognition that, and we have known this, but I think it has only become more clear to me through this process of community engagement, that no matter what we do, despite our best intentions, of course, there is no one decision we'll be able to arrive at that will make everybody happy or feeling included in this community. And indeed, we realize that no matter what we do, there will be members of our community who are disappointed with the decision, who might even feel angry about changes we make or don't make. And there will be people who, through this process, end up not feeling included or valued, even though that is the stated purpose of this undertaking. In the first place, was to increase our sense of inclusion and representation of our calendar. I think along the way that leads to a takeaway for me, not so much of the MICA meeting, but just this process thus far, which is to recognize just how messy our calendar is and has become over time, and how the experience of families and some employees and staff of the sort of disjointed nature of our calendar has, I think, created a lot of feelings around our calendar that may have actually little or nothing to do with the religious and cultural holiday aspect of it, but which are now things that we are needing to kind of address through this process as well. So that is something I was thinking about. But in terms of the MICA discussion, I think we discussed various benefits and challenges of different approaches. And it was good to hear particulars from different leaders, sort of how they imagined some changes might impact their particular community. We talked about the value and importance of whatever happens with days off, of being able to learn to do this educational piece, this definitely need to do even better around making accommodations and careful planning and foresight to avoid conflicts and accommodate people as best as possible with our calendar. Even you referenced athletics from our listening session, even if it's a school day, for example, extracurriculars we recognize bring a lot of additional considerations that are important. So whether it's going to be a day off, not a day off, there's a lot of work for us to do. It was identified in the meeting that there are some things going well with this. We are building on some success in terms of ways that our district is already accommodating students or planning carefully in some cases, and then other places where we can keep doing better with that. So that was a really good discussion, but I think we all shared the appreciation of the value of celebrating the different religious and cultural traditions that we're lucky to have represented in our community. And so we were able to kind of just say that we're going to keep working together with MICA to make sure that the systems we end up building, the practices that we want to cultivate, that we can do that in an informed way, like with our colleagues in MICA. So that was really great. So what would either of you add to that?
No, I think I would emphasize sort of the point of this is a difficult decision, right? It's a difficult process, and that by no means are we going to arrive at a decision that's perfect for all. But we must keep in mind sort of the purpose of this is to try to be more inclusive, keeping in mind our core sort of purpose for being, which is really the education of our students. Right. And so how do we make sure we don't lose sight of that? The desire to really collaborate, I think, around this piece of educating our students, around the diversity, the richness that we have in the town, and how can we make sure we do more of that in a more standardized way across all schools, that it doesn't depend, it's not by school, right? If you go to this school, you might get this, but this one you don't, but really how it regardless of what school, that our students are getting a very similar experience, in that, there could be some learning that we could do by looking at other districts, which I know we have in some way, but it might not hurt for us to look at others again and see how they're approaching this, this desire to be more inclusive. That's what I would say. I don't know if you would add anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think what struck me was one, just like the energy of everybody wanting to work together to solve this. Yeah. And I think it's a challenge because it's not the kind of thing that you're designing from the ground up, right? Like, we have a history of hundreds of years of breaks and times that have already been, that are established in like every school district in this country, and that's where we're starting from, right? So we're not like sitting down and constructing something with a blank piece of paper, and I think there's great complexity in trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together. And then, as you both mentioned, as came up today in the conversation, like what's the educational impact, both in terms of the understanding of the diversity we are, the acknowledgement, the impact on people in the community, and then there's also the side of like consistent weeks and the realities of our classrooms getting hot and hotter year by year, and like that's a reality we have to face too. So I think some issues are balancing between like two things. This is an issue that I think we're balancing many different things, and it impacts a lot of people. So I think I commend the entire community that's engaging on this and bringing really kind of thoughtful conversation to it. And I feel confident that you all will make the right decision. That was a joke. It was like, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, and like and based on what you just said, just closing out this like summary of some of the MICA conversation themes. It is, we don't exist in a vacuum. It's not just Milton Public Schools like calendar, legacies of calendar discussions past that we are building on, but it is our our culture and society in the United States and in public education in the United States, which, as I think Rabbi B, you were sort of acknowledging, is really shaped through a lens that centers Christianity. And so, that is a reality that is just much larger than our town, our school district, obviously. So, that felt kind of important to even just acknowledging that piece. And we will be able to do what we can do through this process to make our calendar like the best it can be for the residents of our community. And with that, I guess we can transition to look a little bit at what we can learn from the survey data. And like from there, just open up the conversation, to see where we're at, and most importantly, like what more, if we have one more chance here to like fold in the information that will support us to make this important decision, what would that look like? So I want to really name a big disclaimer with this presentation, which is titled, in the title of the document, but I'm going to add it on the title slide, draft. Okay. Now listen, I did my best, okay, over
Comment on the
Thanksgiving week to try to like compile some preliminary findings from our data. I didn't include the new district logo on my slides because I couldn't figure out how to find it. The slides are very
Dead to me.
the slides are very unappealing visually, and they're not branded. And also, but more.
Is there anything good about them?
No, but more importantly, what I really need to emphasize is that what we can do here is share some high-level takeaways with the community of the quantitative, like, summary of the data, which is important. We also, however, know that anytime you're looking at data, it matters how you're slicing it. Like, what you learn from the data is really driven by like how you're choosing to analyze and interpret the data. And I was able to do a preliminary, not thorough job with this. So please know that, and please know that we all have access to all this data, okay? And so, like, I really invite all of us to pull out new findings, that go beyond what I have been able to start us out with here. Okay, so on slide 2.
Hold on, I can screen share.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Okay, so would really want to begin by really like thanking the community again, because we had 947 people respond to this survey, which was a Google form, and that's actually like a lot of responses to, like in hindsight, I think had we realized we would be so lucky to have that many responses, I might have pushed to like take the survey through Qualtrics or something that would make it even easier to like slice the data in different ways. But it's just great that we got that much of a response from the community. And here you can just see, generally speaking, like who responded to the to the survey. About 55% of the respondents were identifying as parents or guardians of Milton Public School students. We had an additional 6% were both parents and guardians, as well as faculty and staff of the district. We had 26% of the respondents were faculty and staff. We appreciated the MEA's help in sharing that survey so that faculty and staff would be able to participate if they chose. We had 8% of students, and also appreciate the student representatives at the high school's help with making students aware of the survey, and 5% other people filled out the survey. 423 of those who responded did open response questions, which is really, really impressive. That was all the questions were optional, so people took the extra time to share perspectives with us through that. Moving on to the next slide. That just kind of tells you what I was just talking about a little more broad strokes. Okay. This is showing us the school affiliations of the respondents for the survey. So we can see, a pretty good range. Of course, a broader range than among our 4 elementary schools. A little variety in who was responding to the survey. Not proportional to the population size of those schools. And then Pierce and the high school. This is just a couple of slides of the demographics of those who filled out the survey. And so we had noted that this doesn't totally align with what we know to be the racial ethnic makeup of our district. However, we also do have this almost 20% of people who preferred not to disclose, so that we don't actually know. I guess it could be that the results are closer to representative. We just have no way of knowing that because for folks who were choosing that category. Okay, this is the religious identity. And I kind of summed it up on the left-hand side since the graphic on the right is so hard to read. It was good to learn about additional categories that people shared comments wished would have been included as among the options. So that was good to learn about. DESE does not collect this data about our students to know whether or not this breakdown is representative of our district. And here's where I'm just sharing headlines of the 2 main multiple choice questions that were shared. So this was just the statement: Milton Public Schools should acknowledge religious and cultural holidays celebrated by members of our community with a day off from school, even if that results in a longer school year. You can see that the vast majority of respondents strongly disagreed with that. Especially when you combine that with disagreed. That's, a pretty clear preference. With that statement, and then the next slide, thank you, Mark. So we kind of wanted to present the question in these couple of different ways. And just a reminder that these options we have been considering have been shaped by what we've learned from other school districts as approaches that have been taken. So this is a very similar question, but it's just sort of worded differently, and a similar response emerges, which is that the majority of people strongly agree or agree that we should reduce the number of days off. And what that says is while allowing for excused absences, that got shortened from the text of while allowing for excused absences for those who do celebrate a given holiday. I wanted to share here some preliminary observations that I made in digging further into the responses, sort of respondent by respondent, and trying to sort the data just in some different ways that I was curious about, given what I had heard coming into this, process, and also in some of the listening sessions that I was able to to attend in the past few weeks. I think it is important to note, and I started in this analysis by just investigating what the data would look like if I really focused on some different groups within the larger respondent pool. And what that reveals is that within some of the groups in our community, that trend of strongly feeling a certain way, strongly being ready to let go of holidays rather than extend the school year, that actually doesn't play out the same way if you are looking at that data broken out by these couple of groups, Jewish respondents, Muslim respondents, who actually feel differently in those couple of cases about those questions. I also investigated how faculty and staff were feeling about the question to just understand if that mapped onto a similar trend. And they actually have a lower they're right about the same, but actually a little bit less than the respondents as a whole, in terms of agreeing or strongly agreeing with that statement. And I did notice that, however, the trend of one's religious identity in the case of these two groups that I started exploring, but that actually plays out for those faculty and staff as well. And they are then more likely to feel differently than the majority. Open response themes, I'm just gonna we'll put this rest of this out there and then, open up for what else you all are seeing, what questions you have. This is in order of, so I went through and sort of crudely tried to code the open responses, all 400 plus responses, just to identify what are the things that were most often coming up in those responses. So this is the top 6 most common things, and I'm sort of summing up what the themes were. If you go through and read them, the most common thing, or things that were coming up, was highlighting the importance of providing excused absences for holidays and avoiding important conflicts. So I think that's built on an assumption that of perhaps not having days off for the holidays, that people were agreeing with that approach, if it's accompanied by a strong attempt at doing this piece. So that I wanted to make sure that kind of came across. There were a lot of people who put a version of the school year is already too long compared to other districts. And I think, as you talked about, and as came up in the listening sessions, that is a clear message that I think we're hearing. And so if we're looking at adding additional days off within the year, I think we really have to take a hard look at how we are able to make other internal changes to the calendar that don't result in a really prolonged year. There was a lot of requests in the open responses for more consistent timing for PD days, which came up in our listening sessions as well, including early dismissal days. Referencing other districts that have one first Wednesday of the month or something of that nature, where families would be able to plan around it better. There was concern about the amount of time that students are already out of school for the variety of ways that is already happening. There were enough specific requests in open responses to add half days before Thanksgiving and or Labor Day that I think it was important to note, because that was just a lot of people specifically named that. So I know we've already talked about it, but that was interesting. And then this idea highlighting the importance of acknowledging and learning about important holidays in school, whether they're days off or not. There's this recognition that that would be valuable. And that, again, just reinforces things we heard in the MICA discussion, as well as the listening sessions that we've seen. I organized some representative, sample open responses on the last 3 slides, and these are going to be hard to read. They're a little bit small. But this first slide, 11, is raising common themes and just providing some open response quotes that voice some of the themes that were most coming up the most. And so kind of let you just read through some of those. And I put that's my bold language around the high classroom temperatures in June, because that was something that a number of faculty and staff raised in open responses as a concern. The next 2 slides focus on responses that I selected here for one of 2 reasons. I either chose to highlight it here because it was representative of a number of similar responses, or because it was a kind of unique response, but a reminder of a piece that maybe hasn't really been considered yet. And I think that, I wanted to just share people's actual words with us here, because it also helps. These are real people who are sharing really important information with us. And it also shows that we have a variety of perspectives. So then finally, these were open responses because, as I said, there were many people who weren't speaking to religious or cultural holidays but took the opportunity to share feedback in general on the calendar. And I thought, again, this is only a sample. There are a lot of good feedback here. Provides a gist of the wealth of input that we've been receiving here, which is really good. It's what we wanted, and it contributes to this challenge that that we have here, which is to kind of respond as best we can to this wide range of feedback. And I will say, I didn't choose to like document this in the slide, but in case you do want to explore the open responses, just to you, my colleagues, I wanted to point out that a number of people, you know, I don't know what would count as a significant number, but like there were people that did include heartfelt thanks to us, not just for seeking input, but for the work that we do serving on school committee. So it was always nice to come across one of those. All right, so thank you, Mark, for sharing that. And I guess, wow, that was like the vortex of, oh my gosh. Okay, interesting. So, what do you think? Oh, before 2 weeks, one thing we did identify as a next step is that for our next meeting, we're going to develop some scenarios, actually, calendars, look next year, for example, and like what could be some ways to like take these different options and have it map onto an actual calendar of 25, 26. So we can actually make a recommendation that's grounded in like we've had so many abstract discussions about this. So let's actually look at what it would mean to do that. And some of it will be obviously like contingent on bargaining, because there are some of the dates that are currently in our contract. So that is one thing that we're going to do. What other things do you want to talk about and or like feel would be supportive as we kind of close in on arriving at some type of decisions around this?
And just one thing to add relative to bargaining and contracts, we won't know the outcome of that during this deliberation. So that will be pending, you know, what the decision is around all of the days in the calendar. It may be a while before.
Right. Yep. That's.
So I guess to that point, I was going to ask, I know this conversation, I think didn't start last year. Like this wasn't so have there been any presentations or anything around, you had referenced other districts, like what are kind of what districts are doing? Like because there are a lot of comments on we start later and we start earlier and finish later, but I don't know like how we compare to other districts. And then I think the other question I had, which you just referenced, is as we're thinking about it, understanding contractually where the obligations are. So, that had come up before about, I think, the day out before Thanksgiving. It was sort of like, well, it's not really a holiday. I mean, I understand people want to travel, but then recognizing, is that part of their contract, or before Labor Day, or PD days? Like, I think having this sort of at least as far as right now, they're must-haves that we wouldn't be able to affect next year would be really helpful to know, because if there are those are like set days already that we have to account for. I think that would be helpful to know.
I can just answer that.
Okay.
So the 2 days, the day before, the Friday before Labor Day, and the Wednesday before Thanksgiving are in the contract for Unit A, all units. So those would have to be bargained through contract negotiations, most likely. We also have in the Unit D contract and our AFSCME contract for custodians, we have, I believe they have 8 holidays in total, and Good Friday and Yom Kippur are noted as one of their holidays. Those would be easier. Those could be an MOU where we could meet and say, you have 8 holidays. These are these Warrior 8 holidays now, we're going to treat it differently. So that's a slightly different issue than the other two, which in my understanding, historically, when the calendar was shifted earlier to prior to Labor Day, one of the concessions was we'll move earlier, but we'll extend and add that Friday. And I don't know what year that was, but that's what I heard, how that happened. And I don't know when the Wednesday was added. There was a time when we did have a half day.
Right. Right. And then what about as far as PD? Is that?
So PD, we're required to have 180 days, which we have. Student days, we have 184 days total on our calendar. We have 2 days at the beginning of the year and then 2 full-day PD days during the year. So
it's 180 student days and 184 days for staff
Staff, yeah.
currently. Yeah.
So we're going to, unless we reduced our contract with staff, we're going to have 184 days.
Okay.
You could potentially, I don't think, right now staff are coming back on a Monday. So it would be hard to move more PD days to the beginning of the year. That could be one thing you could do to shorten the year, but then you'd have staff coming back on the Friday before. I'm not sure how far we'd get with that. It's possible. Or moving both professional development days and having them all at the beginning of the year. So you'd come back Thursday and Friday. And of course the benefit for staff would be, like the calendar would be shorter. The challenge of that for us is for professional development, front loading all of it and then not having time with staff later on to develop and build is problematic.
Only having half days.
Yeah, only having half days, and with the realities of transportation, as you all know, ending times aren't the same in schools. So getting all staff together in a half day is it Herculean, would you say? Close to it.
You've been carrying me
It's
down everywhere.
it's very challenging. It's very challenging. And then you have like a really short window. So that's one, just looking at the calendar from an educational standpoint. It would be great to have 4 days at the beginning and a couple days in the year.
And then to your question about other districts, we can share that actually, prior to when you joined school committee, we had a folder that included sample calendars, I think, from other districts. So we can find that and share that with you. And that was sort of in an effort to learn about other districts that had taken the path of adding additional days off. That was sort of what brought us to the recognition that while we began this iteration of the discussion focused on the request from community members to add a day off for Eid, we realized that when other districts had taken that step, most often they had done that as a part of an initiative to add a dish beyond Eid. Also, Lunar New Year and Diwali were the two sort of other holidays that we noticed being added. And that was sort of coming, those were the questions that we left off with, I guess, last spring, and which is why we're still having this conversation.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts that people want to put out there now, before we kind of continue digesting this? Or are there other things you would like us to gather, or other, for example, questions we want to look into our survey data for, et cetera?
Well, I just want to say thank you for putting this together over Thanksgiving break. It's a lot. I appreciate you doing this for us. It's really helpful. And thank you also for the process that you took in this whole calendar initiative with the forums and the discussions and the surveys. I think it really spoke volumes to the type of leader you are, so I appreciate that. And, and I think our efforts as a school committee to be more inclusive and also, bringing community members and various stakeholders into the conversation. So thank you.
Thanks. This has been a good example of, I think, how we've been working as a team. I've appreciated that a lot.
So I think that the cut of the data by sort of your preliminary observations around, sort of where people identify in terms of their religious faith and sort of the difference from just looking at the full sample versus looking by religious affiliation or identification. I think it's one to consider, right, to think about, because it is a very big difference. And it would, right, if we look at the data just by slide 7, it would seem like our decision is pretty simple, or straightforward.
Right.
But I think the minute we start looking at more carefully at the data, I think you see the fact that not so much, and that we do need to consider sort of the impact that just removing sort of holidays that are observed that are not federally recognized would impact a subset. And I would push us to think about, I think, the image of the dinner table, and how can we think about that, right, as complicated as it is, and hard to try to be as inclusive as possible, to continue thinking through that lens as we make our decision wherever we arrive. I think that's what the data for me, it reminds me of that and how important that is.
Thanks, Lena. Anybody else? And Bao obviously is away, so she's also, I think that's another advantage, of course, built into the taking a little more time for processing this information and arriving somewhere, is that obviously allows Bao to participate in that next piece. So.
Only other two things, I was quickly slicing the data, just what you probably maybe saw. Catholics, anybody who identified at all Catholic, obviously on the opposite end of wanting to remove, the 84% to like just under 10% in terms of favorability of removing. So again, I know that's, as we're talking about potentially, if we move towards removing something, one of the two would be Good Friday. So I just wanted to look at that and thought that was interesting. Other was just, I just pulled like any other stated religion beyond kind of the three primary ones that seem to be kind of affected by our discussion, being kind of, or I should say the Abrahamic, thank you, religions, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim. So if any of the other ones, it's like 80-20, or I'm sorry, 71 to 20% difference in favor of removing. So again, just trying to slice the data as you were, of like looking at these other subgroups to see what is the general feeling and response we're getting back. But again, definitely appreciate all the work you've done to help organize this and hold this, and I think having the extra time to look through this will be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. So we'll keep going at this. Sorry, it's 8:24. We're moving to finance.
Great. I'm gonna echo it here. Finance update, we had a meeting. We're going to go over the presentation, so I don't think there's much of an update. I've not reviewed and signed yet the vendor warrants, so we will strike that from this.
Okay.
But otherwise,
And I'm going to remind us at the end of the meeting, too.
about the vendor warrant?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you got that email.
Just in case. Just in case.
We'll walk over there and sign it. So I'll hand it over to you. You want me to pop up the slides?
Sure.
Oh, I got a screen share first.
So I am just going to start the presentation tonight just with an overall recap of the level service information that we discussed at our last full school committee meeting towards the end of November. So just as a reminder for everyone here and for those that may be listening tonight that didn't have an opportunity to listen to the last meeting, the proposed fiscal year 26 level service budget is a 9.44% increase over fiscal year 25. And again, I think it's just important just to provide that additional context that the level service budget is the amount of money that we would need next year to provide the same level of services that we're providing in this fiscal year. So the increase of 9.44% reflects several different factors that we had discussed at our last meeting. But just as a reminder, the increase reflects the following: step increases in cost of living adjustments for all of our employees, so those salary increases that we see year over year, an adjustment to the substitute employee budget to reflect updated rates, so the current rates and also historical usage, out-of-district special education tuition rate increases, and also increases to transportation costs, inflationary and contractual increases to many goods and services, and that includes our curriculum subscriptions, our yellow bus transportation or the in-district transportation that we provide, instructional materials, and some of the contracted services that we utilize throughout the school district. And then another important piece in the level service budget presentation was a reduction in the circuit breaker. So circuit breaker being the special education tuition reimbursement funding that we receive from the state. And so we had proposed a reduction in the utilization of circuit breaker from the levels in fiscal year 25 of 2.8 million to a reduced level of 2 million in fiscal year 26. And that was just giving us the opportunity to reestablish the circuit breaker reserves that we had had previously that we don't currently have this year. And so that will give us the opportunity to reestablish those reserves in an iterative way moving forward. So if you go to the next slide. And so in saying all of that, the level service budget does not include any of the additional buses to accommodate demand for transportation at the secondary level. So we did have some conversation during Finance Subcommittee talking about our current transportation and district transportation and how we do still have an active wait list. So we are not able to accommodate all of the students that register for transportation at the secondary level. We are making sure that we are providing transportation to the students that we are mandated to do so by the state, but there are a number of families and students that would like to utilize transportation that we simply don't have the capacity to do so with our current fleet given the current funding levels. The level service budget also does not include funding for curriculum materials that are currently grant funded or funded by outside organizations, such as the parent-teacher organizations and some of our sports boosters. And so with the grant funding, if it's a competitive grant, it's not, we're not guaranteed that we'll receive that funding in the next fiscal year. And so if we would like to be able to provide that consistent curriculum materials or that consistent curriculum resource to our students and to the district, we would like the opportunity, or that funding is not currently in the level service budget. So that's just another consideration. Level service does not include funding for additional staff to address class size or over-enrollment, and it does not include any additional teaching staff as recommended in previous budget presentations. And so we've talked a little bit about, I know in previous years there's been recommendations for some additions above level service, which have not been funded. And so just as a reminder, just because funding is not secured doesn't mean that the need for those positions go away. And so those needs in many instances still exist, even though that funding is not available.
So I'm going to take us through the needs-based additions. I think we talked about this previously, at least at Finance Subcommittee, that we've been working with our principals and leadership team as a whole to really kind of try to look at this both from the building level and think at the building level, and also as a team think at the district level. So I think we're getting better at this year by year. We are building this needs-based and level service budget around the implementation plan. Some of that is visioning and really kind of thinking about, we don't quite have enough information yet because we haven't built some of these, we're in the process of building some of these systems, so we don't, as an example, with some of our things that we've moved to year 2, we're not yet sure where we're going to land in terms of the model and what it's going to look like, so we don't yet know what the exact staffing will be. It's certainly a consideration as we work with the town and we look at the roughly level services around 6 million. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Over 6 million, 6.5.
Yeah. So we look at that number and we look at thinking about, if an override is set in motion, we have to be thinking about year 1, year 2, year 3, and we are trying to be thoughtful about multi-year planning as opposed to just like, how much money do we have this year and what can we get, what do we need to get rid of, because we end up in this push-pull where we don't really, we let go of our vision and our structure and we just like grab at needs. Mm-hmm. And we are trying to move out of that. So on to the next slide. So this is our list of needs-based additions in year 1. And I'm going to talk about them. We have separate slides for each of these with like a bit more information and rationale around them. I don't see any readers coming out.
I already put them on.
Okay. Okay, on to slide 6, where I'll start digging into these. So in priority area 1, academic excellence, we've talked about the need for both increases in staffing for our English learners. That program continues to grow. Caseloads are quite high right now. So there's an addition here, just moving 2.8 positions to 1.0 positions, so that's an increase of 0.4. And down below you'll see also an addition in terms of leadership of EL, which has been, I think it's one of our highest identified needs going into next year. And it's a kind of kick the can down the road type of situation where we've pieced things together for a while and we just I think everybody on the team recognizes we have to take a step forward and solve that issue. Elementary teacher, this is a class size issue where kindergartens started this year quite large. We heard at the central office from principals, all 4 of our elementary principals, that, wow, like that was the response we heard from them about the class size. I think we were at a point at the beginning of the year where we were wondering if we needed to add an additional kindergarten class. We kind of squeaked through, and this is responding to that need. And then the elementary team chair is bringing up, so currently Tucker has a 0.6 team chair, which is not enough for the needs at Tucker, and doesn't match our staffing at other schools. So we want to bring that position from a 0.6 up to a 1.0. On to the next slide. So last year we added 2 positions at Pierce Middle School to make that 6th grade team whole. There was you'll see on year 2 requests, we've moved a request for 2 exploratory teachers at Pierce, but because we got those 2 positions at Pierce, we felt like it was important to kind of address some of the asks at the high school that we've seen for a number of years. I think you all probably saw them before I was here. One is the business teacher. That's a perennial ask. One is addressing class size in PE and health. And the 3rd position here is, and there's like a little addition of 0.2 French FTE to respond to a need. A 1.0 college and career readiness teacher / counselor to someone who's really focused on post-secondary, and both take some of that work away from the counselors who have a pretty significant counseling load among them, and someone who also is able to really kind of think differently around helping students develop a vision. So it's not just someone whose main focus is getting every student into an Ivy League school. It's someone who's working with every student at the high school and helping them to develop a vision and making connections in the community and building out internships. And I mean, it's a position that could do a lot and I think be pretty impactful. It is a position that I started in Vermont and saw that grow and really take off. So I've seen that happen in real time. Curriculum, professional learning, and collaboration time. We talked earlier about our calendar and the lack of time we have to really develop all the systems that we're working on. So this is responding to a need with all of the action team work this year going into the summer. This can't just be carried by the central office. Nothing will happen, right? So we need to be bringing staff together who are the experts to be both guiding, learning, leading together with us. So this is funding to support work happening over the summer and into the year as well. So that would be bringing staff together beyond contracted hours, for example, to continue some of this work and really ground it. So we're not like fighting for 5 minutes or 10 minutes in an early release day to try to get something done that really is going to take 3 hours of thoughtful work with a group of people. Curriculum, moving on to slide 8. So there are a number of curriculum resources that we have included in the needs-based budget here. These are both related to SEL, to reading, and to French reading assessment. We are working right now, and something that Katie and I are doing together with our principals and with our PTOs and MFE, et cetera, is we would like to fix the inequities that are currently at play where,
Excuse me.
you know, there's a bit of a lack of clarity sometimes around what PTOs support, what MFE supports, and what the district supports. And we don't want, we want every student to have similar access. So this funding would also allow us to make sure that if some things are happening at one school and, for example, a PTO may not have the funds at another school, we'd be able to like make sure that we're aligned. And then ultimately what we'd like, where we're headed is like real clarity around what the general fund is carrying, so we don't have to, there's no backfilling that's happening, but we're basically like putting all of that resource into every one of our schools in a way that every kid is having kind of similar access to experience and learning. Curriculum materials, so we've talked about last year. Amanda, were you here for Kat's presentation? Was that? Okay, I think it was last spring, but it might have been before, like April maybe or something. So Kat DeRoche, who is currently our K-8 literacy director, presented on the work she's done to adopt a new curriculum for ELA. So it's a really big, long process. There were, I mean, even I remember right when I was hired 2 years ago, there were a lot of questions. The Boston Globe had just come out with a piece on approved reading curricula, and ours was kind of semi-approved for a few different reasons. We've addressed that in different ways, but we are now positioned, I think, and Kat has done a lot of work working with both internally and with the South Shore consortium, literacy consortium that she's a part of, to be in. We're kind of in line right now to make this happen, and I think very important that we do that. A committee is starting to form, so there's a snowball rolling down the hill right now. So if we need to, I don't want to get run over by that snowball. So this is important. And I think would be supported well by our community too. The next slide. So the first thing here is Assistant Director of Student Services. So this would essentially be someone who would take on guidance of kind of, we're thinking primarily EL, but also we're recognizing that in student services, there is so much like paperwork and communication, and we recognize that we're understaffed there. And for us to really do the work that we want to do, we need to have enough people to both set the vision and be able to execute it. So this position would both lead our EL program, but would also support other areas of student services as well to create like a real needed depth in that department. The additional stipends for extracurricular activities. One of the things I mentioned here, development of focused tutoring where data supports its need. I'd like to be able, and we're kind of working through, and we're kind of starting with a pilot at Tucker right now, of thinking about what kind of model would best fit some of the learning needs of our students, especially as we kind of went through the data recently and talked about some of the things, how we're responding to that. I'd like to start working on a focused tutoring program district-wide, potentially starting, like as I mentioned, with a pilot at Tucker and then spreading that across the district. So this funding would support that work. Priority area 3. I've mentioned this human resources director in our last meeting and talking about splitting the position. This is I think goes without saying, the backbone of a healthy organization is a strong human resources department. Our history here has been human resources shared among lots of people, and I think it has shown in I think some of the parts of our culture that we're working to improve and to make this like the most welcoming, professional, supportive organization it can be. So this position, I believe, is really, really important. We've had a custodial shortage at Cunningham and Collicott for some time. Both of our principals there have reminded us of this a few times, right? It's like a weekly topic.
A few times since I've started.
So I had to put this on. I had no choice. And the 2 additional yellow buses, we talked about this last year. I really feel that educationally, we are so close to full capacity for transportation. We added an additional bus into this current budget, which helped. We still have a wait list. We still have families who live in East Milton, who kids have to try to figure out a way to get to school. I think it's a real impact on parents who don't have the leisure of time and maybe are working 2 jobs, and so it does impact a subset of our population more than others. And I've had direct conversations with a lot of these families because when they get frustrated, they want to talk to me because they are hoping I can do something and change the situation. And I think it will have an impact on students being on time. It will have an impact on their education. I think it's the right thing to do, and I don't think we're going to get some funding back for this too. So we also are looking at our fees, and that will be a topic we're bringing to Finance Subcommittee soon, and then that will be coming here, I think, in January. So we will be getting, how much would we get back on those 2, Katie?
26,000.
26,000, okay. That's at the current fee.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if we raise it by 5 times, there you go.
That was a joke.
That was a joke.
Yeah, everybody, that was a joke. Yeah, that was a
Please
joke.
note.
That was a joke. Okay. So year 2, I mentioned the 2 Pierce exploratory teachers, thinking about that in year 2. As a kind of placeholder, this is a conceptual placeholder for teaching and learning coaches. As we build our instructional framework, we need to sustain it. If we don't have coaches working with our teachers to sustain that system, it's going to be very hard for us just through the evaluation process, which is really has a different impact. It's an important one, but it's different than coaches who are Unit A positions, so they're fellow teachers. It's a very different conversation when a teacher comes in and works with you, and there's no fear about being evaluated in terms of what's happening. It's just very different, and has and data supports the use of coaches to impact student outcomes. Director of Communications, we are currently at a 0.5. This was on our needs-based request last year. Stephanie does an awesome job, but it's a 0.5 position, and really bringing that to 1.0 given our size and our needs around communication. It's one of our strategic priorities in our implementation plan, so that I'm thinking in year 2, some administrative assistants. Some of these are in special ed to support the significant amount of paperwork, and some of these could be potentially cost neutral. Is that maybe.
Maybe.
The addition of a school psychologist, adjustment counselor, and 2 instructional assistants at Pierce. So that is some of our thinking around year 2. I think that will change, but just wanted to kind of let you all know that we're kind of thinking a little bit here in stages in terms of needs, requests, and I think the big part of year 2 is are those teaching and learning coaches in terms of the implementation plan and the teaching and learning systems we're developing. That's it. Questions?
So the teaching and learning coaches, would they be shared across the district among all 6 schools?
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of what, as we figure out, and that number of FTE could change too, depending on the model, and that's why we just put 4 in here as a kind of a placeholder in our thinking, because they could operate in different ways, and one of the things that there are different kinds of coaches. You could have a coach that's an instructional coach, not necessarily in a subject area. You could also have subject area specific coaches. So you could have a math coach, literacy coach. We have to determine how they work with curriculum directors, with principals who lead that work too, with the central office, and with like our grade level facilitators, which is teachers who receive a stipend to kind of lead their grade at their school. So we've got a lot of kind of pieces we have to figure out and determine how they would be best utilized. But as we develop our instructional framework and make decisions around all those different components, this will be clearer in terms of, okay, well, this makes sense. Like we'll have 2 working in elementary, and this would be kind of how coverage would happen, and here's, in terms of roles and responsibilities, they'll cover this kind of work, and maybe curriculum directors will do this, and like, so that's a yet to be determined.
So just seeing on the slide with the process and sort of where we're at with it.
Yep.
So we're having this conversation now. Our budget hearing is not until our second meeting in January. Is that still sort of what we're aiming towards? And so that means we have like 2 more meetings next week, next time. 1 more December meeting and then a first January meeting. Are we still aiming to take a vote on this FY26 budget request at our next meeting? Or how is that going to kind of play out over these? Because
Well, last year we didn't-
this, what you've just presented here, like, this is the request that we have as of now, right? Like, we're not looking to add to this. We have last time level service request.
Yeah, no, we're not.
And then we
Yeah,
have
this
this
is-
request.
This is it.
Okay, all
Yep.
right.
Yep. I think the question is, we've got joint on Friday, right?
Yep.
Finance on Friday, so
Okay.
I think there's some coordination probably with the town to determine some of this.
Yeah, we wouldn't officially vote on this until after we go through the full process, which is, again, talking to the town administrator to see at what point is he going to be fine with whatever 12 point whatever percent. Is he going to try and ask us to cut that down a little bit in order to keep an override if he's supportive of an override? And then, so those things will iterate this, I assume, in some ways, similar in terms of conversation with the warrant committee. They might have some feedback or insight that, again, informs this process and then changes kind of what Peter and the team want to then bring back to us. And then kind of after that process, then it's kind of the final version is presented to us, which we'd vote on, and then we'd take that back to the full warrant committee as like, that's the budget we're going to stand by and we want to take towards to the town meeting.
So I do have a couple of thoughts. First, I really like the explanation for each of the positions.
Yep.
And so it's very well explained. I also like that we are addressing the ELA curriculum. And I know that's been kind of been brought up for years, so I appreciate that it's being prioritized. And what I am, though, I'm looking at the positions for year one, and you mentioned that since Pierce got the 2 teachers last year, we're going to look at, getting some additional teachers for Pierce next in year 2, which makes sense. But I have to say, I mean, as a parent, it's my 3rd year at Pierce. And the feedback that I receive on a daily basis, like anytime I'm out, is not great. It's constantly, my kid doesn't feel challenged, they're not ready for high school. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from parents who are 9th grade parents whose kids aren't ready for 9th grade, right? So I'm a little, I'm curious as we kind of develop this, and Pierce, I feel like, is kind of this 3 years that is kind of a blur, right? It's a little bit of a mess. And I'm gonna say, from my own experience, that my 3rd year is a lot better than my 1st year, but it's not that great overall. So I'm curious how we're prioritizing, or are we just kind of gonna wait and address it again, look at it next year, And I feel like that school, because all 4 elementary schools kind of join there from an equitable standpoint, it does make sense to address some of those issues there and make sure that those kids are then prepared to go into 9th grade. I know a few years ago, I think before I was on, that, we talked about removing the level of classes and so on and so forth, but I would really like to know what we have in place. Is that better? Is it working? Is it getting the results that we want? And I just want to kind of understand, and we talked about it a little bit at our governance retreat. What I would really like to see is not I want to know what each school needs to be successful, right? That's what I want to know. And then we can go from there in terms of what makes sense and what doesn't. But it's oh, it would be great to have a 0.5 here or 0.3 here. I want to know, what is their goal and how can we help them get there? Because that's how we get community buy-in. Because we're right here, this is where we want to be, here's a plan to get there, and this is how long it's going to take us to get there if we have these resources. And I would like to see that.
Yeah,
I just feel like this is just hey, we're trying to be very sensitive, we get it, it's a lot of money, and I just don't know if that is, I don't know, I'm just struggling with that.
Yeah. I mean, the requests for the 2 exploratory teachers are not, I don't know as those necessarily tie to what you're talking about in terms of, if you're talking about rigor or you're talking about some of the things essentially that are articulated in the implementation plan around the instructional framework. So I think, sometimes we think it's resources that people need, but it's not actually resources that we need. I mean, I think a lot of what we need is we need to do the work that we're doing, which is looking at our teaching and learning systems, developing coherence, looking to see kind of across all of our classrooms, where are we kind of tight, where are we loose? That is the work that I think, and that's something that we should be sharing with the community as we talk about the budget. These items here are a distillation of all of our conversations around all of those things we've put out as a vision of these are the things we want to attain and these are the things we think we need to do to get there. So yeah, I think with Pierce, the addition of those 2 exploratory teachers is to provide more choice for students. So it's certainly like we see a need for those. But in terms of what you're talking about, it's kind of more integral to like the curriculum that we have, how we're addressing when students are falling behind, how are we addressing when students are bored and could do more, and how are we flexible in terms of our curriculum so that a student in those 3 years that you kind of remember and kind of don't, that they're feeling really challenged and having fun and are, are prepared and excited and all those things. So,
So like, for example, and I mean, this is something that can come out further as this continues to get presented and like discussed, but like thank you for raising that, Anna, to the like curriculum, professional learning, collaboration time, like that justification is so important, so good, like for members of our community who are not educators, who actually don't know what professional learning consists of, like it could, as we move forward, it could be helpful to drill down a little bit to say, like, for example, the kinds of things that we could fund with that resource could include, like, looking at student data to identify when students need, like, accelerated, enrichment, and providing them with that. Like, so I feel like even though that doesn't mention Pierce at all, when I'm looking at that, I'm hoping that that would be like one place that would have impact. But you're pointing out that, like, as this goes forward, that further like level of detail could be helpful. So folks will see that what this is presenting actually will directly address some of the things. It's not really like named.
I think that would be really important, because I think people are looking for kind of what is the plan, right?
Yeah.
Like what are the steps to get there? And it's not, and I know a lot of these are kind of district wide, and they kind of, where the need is, it kind of shifts and changes, and you're creating systems. I understand all of that, but I think really to kind of say, hey, this is what we need, and this is how it's going to help all our schools, is so important to state, because just looking at this, it's like, okay, we have, these are the things that these positions are going to help do, is improve, like finding gaps in our curriculum that needs to be strengthened, and all of that, because that is so important to be communicated out there, because I think that's how you get support, right, for something like this. And it's a big ask, and I think, like, overall it's a big ask. Like, I don't see, like, for year 1 and year 2 being big asks, but like overall I think it's a lot. And so I think what is the narrative, and how are we framing this for the community is so important, because I think when we start looking at, like, we have a teacher here for here and like this and that, it's like, how are we making sure that all our schools, like, we're working towards a goal of getting there, and like the individual schools have their school improvement plans, and like, what can we as a committee do to make sure that each of our schools is successful?
Yeah, I was just, you made me think, Anna, that I think one of the key things is to say to the budget request in the context of the implementation plan. And it's hard because not everyone's wrapped their head around it, right? But to know that these are just additional resources, but it doesn't mean that the other work that's there is not moving us in the direction that I think we all want to see us going.
Well, and I think that's one of the I think people have the thought that when they look at a budget, and I think it's probably happened here historically, we have a problem and we're going to fill it with a position. And there are times when that works really well, but we actually have to change the system. We can't add, like adding more
Right.
people won't change
Understand.
anything. We have to, so that's a good point to make. Like how are we kind of like tying these things together and reminding people of
Well,
this isn't the work. The work we're doing is not this.
Right.
These are the needs-based budget items, but this isn't the work.
Like, it's almost like this is going to sort of help the fire, right, stay, right? It's supporting, but it's not in and of itself. Because without the larger vision and plan, then it's just, we could add more folks sort of going in different directions, but that's not what we want.
and at the same
Kindling,
time,
maybe.
you've identified
That's the
Kindling.
that's
It's
the word I
kindling.
want.
like
Yes.
high leverage positions like the human resources director, which can catalyze a lot of these pieces that we're trying to like accelerate too.
Yeah.
So I think that's also going to be important. I feel like we've talked about that without success in previous years because it's been perceived as just sort of like not a transformational position, but just
Yeah,
like
definitely.
a further like, adding to the bureaucracy of the district or something like that, which is that's the furthest thing from it. It's actually trying to catalyze a total shift in
It's
in
supporting,
increasing our
yeah.
capacity with the folks we already have here, and also like getting good people still coming and staying. So
And diversifying our staff and like
Right.
these
So-
goals that we've set that we
I think
need
that's
we need like a person working on those things.
Yeah, and I do appreciate, like, especially through the academic excellence priority areas, responding to needs that have been emerging, like, and I think that's, it feels timely in that sense. And I notice, like, there aren't the past several years, we've had the approach of adding interventionists. I don't see more interventionists here. What I see is more investment in like strengthening the capacity of the folks we have and the coaching model as we're not taking away the interventionists we currently have, but we're like layering in a new kind of support for our educators. I think I'm appreciating that. And I'll just also say, like, I appreciated what you said about the buses, the transportation. Like, I think that is a decision for us here, but as a town also to like, I'm glad that you're choosing to move us in that direction. I think that is good to do too. So, yeah.
I also really appreciate the effort of looking forward. We haven't done that before, not since I've been sitting here, right? Looking beyond the next year and starting to look ahead. I know this is not comprehensive of everything, but I do think it starts to highlight the priorities as we look forward.
I think one thing I would really like to thank you guys for doing is historically, I feel like the way the budget's been presented has been very siloed, and oftentimes it's like, and I know I know it's my thing, I'm sorry, but it's like special ed funding, and then there's all this blah, 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 and it winds up being, when you're looking at a budget, if you pull all of that out, then people are like, oh, like all that money towards special ed, but when you look at it, it's you haven't pulled any of that out in any way. It's within academic excellence, or it's in different areas. Yes, there's a component of it, but it's one of many things that need to be addressed, which I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, especially because I think in the press lately there's been a lot of focus on special education funding, and it kind of has made things very difficult for a lot of families. But the other thing too is I think there are other things that are done that will support all kids, but also maybe prevent the need for more special ed services like that tutoring piece, which you mentioned, which I think is huge. And I would, I'm hoping that we're looking at that as time that, if it's tutoring, that it's either maybe opportunities for before or after school for kids, that they can take advantage of that.
That's what we are thinking.
Is it? Yeah. Because I think that's the part where it gets hard. You can't do it during the day. How do you make it accessible? The team chair piece, I think, is really important. I mean, I know like every district, when we were looking at the number of kids on IEPs by school, that's a lot of kids for 8.6 to do. But just other things that I think would support it. But then I think finally one theme is, when you were just talking about the buses, and then our earlier conversation about the calendar, I like that we're beginning to talk more about different family dynamics, that how a lot of the decisions we make impact people. So to your point of, not everybody has leisure, the ability, if they're in East Milton, to drive their kids to the high school, if they're both working, or similarly, when we're looking at the days off for people who are working full time, and like, do we need that? That there's impact on people. So having that conversation in a more holistic way, and recognizing that everybody's family dynamics are different, and that our decisions impact them, I think is it's nice to see that level of discussion on it, and that's a consideration as we're looking at the budget. So, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work. Looking forward to more conversations about this and hearing from other stakeholders about this. I think as a initial ask and kind of starting place, I think this is, again, very helpful. To put it in context, like as much as the vast majority of the ask we are making for next year is the level service budget, right? 9.44 is by far, like the under 1.4 million is a 2% ask for a needs-based budget. If you do both years, it's 3.26. This is going to be like our, probably crack at this for the next 5 years, if not more. So it's not honestly as much like additional resource in terms of additional programming and support as I would love to see. Although I certainly understand that when you put that in context of a 12.7%, there's just a cap on what we're going to be able to ask the town. And so I think that's another piece that we're battling, is just as much as we'd like to do, there's so many ideas I'm sure all of us have around the table. Just what is going to be reasonable, what is actually going to get passed, because $0 not getting any of this is way worse than getting some of this. And so what's that line? So again, I think the conversation will be good. I appreciate this. I appreciate the part of the framing around we know the places in which our students have struggled the most, and I think you've discussed that a bit within these around support specific things directed towards Tucker. I completely agree with you that a budget alone does not solve everything. It's about systems and improving practice. But I think a little bit to your point, you were able to talk a little bit about that. I think as we go forward, talking about Pierce as well, given that's kind of the other place in which we've seen more historical struggles of if we're asking for an influx of financial resources, obvious, those are two places. And so what is maybe it's not financial, but what's the messaging around this? I think that's a fantastic point.
I think, my concern, and where I'm coming from is we've looked at so much data, as we've mentioned over the, in my third year here, I've seen so many data presentations, and there's still so many gaps, right? How do we make bigger leaps? I think that's what I'm coming at it from, and if it's, and I get your point about it from hey, we have to improve the systems. It's not just about putting bodies, but I think it's taken so long for change to happen, and I think it's everyone's kind of waiting, right? And so it's what can we do to kind of move so we're not looking at the same data next year? And I get it, 12.5% or whatever is huge, but at the same time, I think, if it's something that's beneficial for all families, right, in our district and community members, I think there would be more support for it. And I think it's really about how you message that. You know, it's not just necessarily about how much you're spending on pupils, but this is what our goal is, where this is what we would like to see happen, and this is where we need your help. And I think that messaging is so, so important, because it you know, it's like, if you know, we can only do so much. You know, it's like, oh, you know, it's like under 1.4 for next year, and then the following year is, you know, under 900K. You know, like, so it's just like, I feel like we're trying to be very strategic about it, but at the same time, it's like the longer we wait on things, the longer it takes for change to happen. And it's like, and it's been like, we have to do something, you know. And I think that's really, like, if we're discussing overrides and so on and so forth, it's like we need to present it with, like, here's how we're going to get there, and this is what we need from you, versus like what will pass. I don't know.
So would you suggest moving things in year 2 to year 1?
I mean, I don't think it's a big difference. And I think also it would be nice to see, like, a 5-year plan, right? Like, what are you going to need? You know,
Yeah,
not
it's
just,
just
I know it's hard
hard.
just yet to do, because
Yeah.
we're so early in the implementation plan. But I think it would be nice to kind of see, like, how we're going to get there, and what are the needs that we're looking at down the road. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to foresee. It's almost better to understand market trends as the years go by in terms of costs than, like, in year 4, we're going to need. It's really hard to say, like, in year 4, we're going to need an admin assist.
right. No, I know.
Or we're going to need an additional teacher, or, like, that's hard to predict. I think thinking about where our population is going,
Yeah.
so maybe looking at, like, we expect we're going to need, due to kind of like class taking patterns and enrollment, we'll need an additional 3 positions. We'll need, you know, we could probably do that. It's easier for us in thinking ahead beyond, you know, like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, to think about maybe the kinds of programming we might be engaging. I think it's going to be easier next year at this time
Okay.
to look ahead beyond kind of where we are now, because we're just kind of like, you know, we kind of got everything figured out last year,
No.
or at least we got close to figuring out. And this year we're kind of starting to build. So, but yeah, we could definitely, you know, think about that in terms of. Do you have any experience with, like, a 5-year?
Not necessarily with positions, but I do think that as we, in looking at instructional framework, in looking at the curriculum review cycle, and we did talk about this a little bit when we met with the town manager and the town finance director, in looking at even just making an addition to be able to fund the ELA curriculum materials. When we build that funding into the operating budget, that funding could potentially, you know, we could have a multi-year expense that we need to make for the ELA curriculum materials, or it could potentially be a 1-year expense that for the next year, if we do have a curriculum review cycle, that would allow us, we're essentially establishing that curriculum funding that we could then invest that into math curriculum materials in the next year, and then it just going through each one of the content areas. And so I think that, yes, some of these expenses that we're adding as additions to level service would be recurring costs, but I do think for some of the curriculum materials, it just gives us that opportunity to provide funding in the operating budget that we can utilize in different ways in future years as we see the needs kind of arise, as student needs change, as curriculum needs change, and then we can adjust. And we'll be able to adjust it kind of within this framework, and we won't necessarily need to every year say, okay, now we need an additional 250.
I think that's really smart to do, honestly, because I think that allows, you know, as I mentioned, you know, we talked about like the the Pierce curriculums that were introduced, like it would be nice to see how are they working? Are they successful? Like, are they doing what they're meant to do? And be able to have that, have the funds to kind of explore those, right? And see, and look at other curriculums as well, like, so it would be nice because I think we can always improve on things, but I don't want it to be like, oh, well, we can't look at it because we don't have the money to look at it. And maybe we can ask down the road. So I think it's like just kind of having those processes in place, I think would really help, for sure.
And I think just in addition to that, having the curriculum materials, but then also having the funding for the summer work, curriculum development, and professional learning. So we talk a lot about not only just buying the materials, but making sure that the educators that are actually using the materials feel like they are comfortable with the materials and ready to actually implement it in the classroom. And so for us, making sure that those kind of two pockets of funding go hand in hand, because again, it doesn't always need to be for ELA curriculum, it can be for any content area, but just making sure that we have that reoccurring funding that's built into the budget, that regardless of what kind of like specific area that we're looking at, we know that the teachers have kind of the time and we have the funding that we can invest into their work, really digging into that, whatever needs to happen outside of even just kind of the course of the school year and the school day, so that they feel prepared that when we do make these pretty significant and really important purchases, that we're not just buying something and then it's not being implemented with fidelity, that they're actually ready to teach and to teach well. So hopefully those two pieces kind of go hand in
Like
hand.
framing that also in our context
Yes.
with peer districts. I think this is an important piece for us to help educate folks on as well, which is that, I work with districts like all over, many of them ones we want to compare ourselves with. This is built in to the infrastructure, the culture, and it sustains excellent practice. We just haven't had it here because we are so lean, and that comes at a cost to our students and our outcomes. So I think helping people think about it that way, it's not like Milton with this request is trying to invent something that like has never been done. No, this is happening in other like really successful districts. Like this is how they reach those outcomes, is through through investing in these ways. So I think that's helpful. And by having a new assistant superintendent, by the way, that's like focused on curriculum and instruction solely, that is part of this too, because that will drive the leadership and accountability for results for these investments, right?
I wonder if, we would love to think that everybody read the implementation plan and was well versed in it, but I think kind of a little bit of what when we're talking about this is framing it in that way. Do you know what I mean? So it's not about, yes, it's about the positions, but even talking about the curriculum, the assistant superintendent curriculum is framing it that way, as opposed to saying it was a shared position and now they're focused on this, but to what, like, because a lot of people don't know even what the roles are or what they're doing. I mean, it's very inside baseball on some of it, and so if there's a way to kind of take a step back, because I do think we've never really told a story. Like it's always like every time the budget comes up, it kind of feels a little bit like whack-a-mole. Like, oh, something popped up, we have to address. It was very tactical as opposed to thoughtful, or felt thoughtful. I'm sure there was thoughtful behind it, but it's never been presented with that view of like, to your point, if it was academic excellence and then what it means, and here's the goal and here's how we're supporting it. I mean, I know it's storytelling, but I do feel like that storytelling piece is important for people, as opposed to, oh, I'm adding up all the FTEs and this and, do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's probably easier just to, and we kind of wanted to get to needs-based tonight, but it because the positions that we're requesting in each priority area are don't really speak to the full, you can't say that if you look at the positions we need, that they're necessarily, in terms of like that area has like all this work happening. It doesn't need any resource. It just needs work. We need these positions in this area to support some of that, not all of it.
Right.
So maybe spending time to just, essentially, like you said, review the work that we're doing.
Like to enhance it, to
And
accelerate
here's
it,
how,
to,
here's how resources help to feed that work in the coming year.
Yeah.
And I think it
And
also,
both current resources and,
Right.
Yeah.
I think also like us being proactive in terms of how we phrase that is also important versus like, for instance, like with like the ELA, I've seen so many emails like float around about the ELA curriculum, like other than like community members bringing it to our attention, like we're constantly reviewing this, right? Like we're ahead of it. We understand, we've noticed the gaps, we're fixing it, this is what we're looking at it, and having those resources and systems in place to automatically do that versus waiting and saying, oh yeah, we'll look at it next year, it wasn't in our budget this year, maybe next year, or the year after, and so on and so forth. I think again, that it creates a lot of frustration in the community and not necessarily support. So I think framing all of these asks, and hey, if it helps to have teaching and learning coaches in for this year versus waiting for next year, I think it's worth asking, like if that helps accelerate some of the work that you're going to do in year one, and that's where it was like, I don't want to like have to wait till next year, like, because it's another year. And, when I think about kids, and you made a really good point a couple of meetings ago about the kids that were in elementary school over COVID are always going to be behind, because of how, because of all the loss that they went through. And that's something that like I'm just like, I want to fix. It's like, so whatever it takes to make those kids on par with where they need to be, so it's just like, how do we accelerate that learning, and how do we make up for that lost time?
And they're coming into Pierce next year.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And some of those kids are already there. So it's like, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
And I think that's really where I'm like, I think for me as a school committee member, it's just like, I see that, I hear from parents all the time about that, and it's really, really just, it's like I feel helpless, and in a way, like that's why I'm like, just like, hey, let's do, and same thing with Tucker. Like you hear it all, you see it all the time, right? Like how do we help those kiddos, right? Like so that they're successful by the time that they get to Pierce and had the same experience that everybody else had, I mean, I identify with those kids. Like I was a first generation coming to in America. Like my parents didn't speak the language. Like I didn't have the resources. So I get it. Like so what can we do there? So it's just, I think it's so important. Like whatever we need to do. And I think really like what do we share with the community, and what is it? It's not just like, oh, here's a list of positions and you've been on warrant and you get your budget book and you look at all the lists and it's like, okay, but really what is the message that we share with the community? What are we trying to do? It's not necessarily about, our per pupil spending is low, but it's really about how are we supporting all these students to be successful in their own way, and how are we providing them the resources that they need that they might not have, and how do we make it equitable for everyone? So, but this is great. Thank you so much for for all of this.
But I
it's
do
really
wonder,
helpful.
I mean, you're making me think of like really the question that's thrown back to you, of like, are there items in year two that you would pull and move to year one? Or, or is it really this thinking of, well, we asked for as much as we think we could get?
well, I mean, I guess
or is it, are
that
we
was
ready?
part of,
Right.
I mean, I think as Mark alluded to, it's 9.44.
Correct.
So like there is some, we were trying to bring some realism
Yeah.
as well, just in thinking about what we
I understand, but I
Yeah.
feel like last year we went with a very small budget, and it was very like, here's our list of positions that we need. And I was like, oh, well, we can wait till next year to do that. And it's like, but I think here we have an opportunity, really,
Yeah.
to, because having you
right,
here
yeah.
for a year, and now you have this vision, and we're all here supporting the work that you were doing, right? Like, we're all messengers out into the community. And really just, how do we sell this? Because we're here in service of the students in our schools, so what can we do?
Yeah, I feel like to that point, it could be interesting to have some type of like a key for folks that color codes or something. Like, this is a previous ask. Like, this is a need that has been requested and gone unfulfilled. In some cases for multiple years. And when we've been asked by the warrant committee to prioritize, we have done that. And we have left needs like on the cutting room floor. So if there's a way to make sure, especially for new warrant committee members, I'm imagining, or new select board members who may not have been tracking, like, oh, they've actually been asking for this, and they've not gotten it, and the need has just like compounded as a result. So that, as distinct from new needs, like new requests for things that have been identified specifically through this process of the implementation plan, as like they haven't been requested before, but they're not coming out of left field. They're coming through that thoughtful implementation plan development process, which is why we didn't request them previously, because that was the process that occurred over the past year. Do you know what I'm saying? So either way, though, there's like a way to make those requests somewhat even more compelling by like tagging them as like how they've come to be in this request.
And I think it would be really helpful if there was a previous request that was put off for several years, and what that has kind of snowballed into now, right? Like, because we didn't hire this one position, now we need like 4 to make up for, because of all the, like, it would be interesting to kind of look at that and see, because there are things, like, we understand it because of our work here, but community out there might not be as close to this as we are, right? So it's just when they're looking at numbers, it might not, like, oh, well, do you really need that? That's another, where can we cut? But like, really to understand, like, these are not just positions to fill bodies in the schools, but they're actually working towards something together. And all of these are really important for various reasons.
And it is fiscally responsible in that way, because there are places where you're not proposing just FTEs, you're proposing like resources to be used in other ways that will like have bang for the buck, sort of. So that's
you
all
made
good.
a really interesting point that there's no interventionists on this list. This is the first year I'm seeing a budget list without interventionists, because all our schools have one.
They have them.
And every presentation that I've seen so far,
is the difference.
they've all stated how important it is having their own interventionists, right? That's huge. And not one has said, oh, well, we were fine, we don't need it. They're all, every presentation I've seen, they make it a point to highlight that. So, and it's good, because otherwise we would still be asking for more interventionists, right? Because we didn't get them when we needed them. Sorry.
I think this is all good. And again, I'm interested. We're having the meeting with town administrator on Friday and select board finance, so we'll get that. Again, I'd love to ask for more, and maybe again, we're not quite nailing the ask. How I love your positivity and go get them this. I just think, like, ultimately, even if it's not warrant committee and select board that we get through, like, ultimately we have to go in front of the town as a whole, right? And if the town votes down the override budget, right, because we overshot it that's a
We have
hugely disastrously impactful,
Yeah.
because then we don't have the money for the ELA curriculum, right? We don't have the money for the HR director, and we don't have the money for year 2 of the coaches, any of that stuff. So I think the
And
math.
we'll be cutting level service, basically.
Yeah, and if we need an override just to cover the 9.4, we're actually cutting services. A great point. So like I think the challenge is that we are trying to both overcome an incredibly tight budget that we've been living with for years, that Katie is working to right size within just the level service. At the same time, also looking to gather needs needed to implement the implementation plan and address all the challenges that the team is seeing and building coherence towards solving. And then you have the just political reality of we're going to have to get 51% of voters to pass it. And like, again, not to say that the exact request here that they put out for us kind of in this first draft is the right one exactly, but I think like that is the calculation we will need to make as a committee before pushing that off, before voting and then taking that out and advocating that for warrant. Say like, is this the right? Are we pushing it? And I think that's also something that, again, Nick Milano will have a lot of feelings about, I think, because it will impact not just us, but it will impact all town services, both from their needs and their level of service. So it's bigger
So at our
than
next
us.
meeting, you'll be updating us on that conversation. Okay.
Can I ask a question though? So say it was, because all of a sudden I'm getting confused about something. Say so I don't know how to ask this. If we have the level service and then the needs based, then if we're asking the needs based, aren't we essentially asking for wouldn't it be an override? Or are we just saying we want to, where I'm getting stuck is the year 1, year 2.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're looking for needs-based, we're calling it when those roles would be implemented, but aren't we asking for the budget? Like
You'd still be asking for both of those within the override. Probably.
Right, exactly.
Usually,
So it's really a matter of when those are implemented, when you're looking at it year 1, year 2, aren't you?
Yeah, you're going to still need the money.
You're still going to
upfront,
need the money.
yeah.
So I'm just thinking about your question, like you could expedite it, or am I
Right,
incorrect?
no, but
in
if
thinking
you're
about that
thinking
way?
of that, because this is sort of, I think, where I was, sort of wanting to look ahead, because as I think about the override, we need to be thinking beyond 2 years.
Right.
Oh.
So it needs to be,
Yes.
Right, but that-
even further out, right? So in some
yeah.
ways, part of me is like, do we really, now that you said it in that way, right? Talk about sort of year 1, priority list 1, year 1, priority list 2.
Right.
Because really, this is the need that would inform the immediate need for the override. But knowing that in order to sustain that, we have to then build that into, future budgets. Plus, obviously, incremental increases as we think about anything else that's in the implementation plan. So in that sense, our first bite at making the case for, of course we need an override, is sort of the full amount.
Right.
Not,
We're not year 1.
yeah.
Right.
Right. But it's framing it in terms of, obviously, if we have to choose, then this would be sort of our big ask for FY26, and this is the ask for FY27. But I'm just trying to understand sort of the override too, because I haven't lived through one yet.
Right.
So for our 9.44%, would we need an override?
We
to get
don't.
that? We don't.
We don't know.
Okay.
Or that hasn't been clearly stated by the town administrator
Okay.
at this point to our finance committee.
Okay. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking too. Like we would have to plan, like how long, if we're doing an override that's going to last us for 5 years, we almost kind of need the funds, or we know. And then my other question is when you kind of look at our level service budget for next year, right? Like not this budget cycle, but the next one, are you going to is it going to be a similar increase of like 9% type, like?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
It shouldn't be.
Okay.
No. But again, it definitely looking at the budget drivers, if we do continue to have a reduction in offsets, then we're going to see a continued larger increase for level services. If the state is mandating, they go back and say, okay, now we need to go back to, we had a 14% inflationary increase, we bumped it down to 3%, but now we need to go back up to 8%.
Right.
Then we'll have, so it kind of like those factors.
Right.
I don't have a good sense, but it truly is not uncommon to see a level service increase in the range of 4 to 6% year over year,
Okay.
just kind of depending on those fluctuations. 9 is
High.
higher,
Yep.
but it's also addressing some of the kind of issues, or not issues, but some of the elements of the utilities, substitute budget, those areas that I think we are right-sizing in the level service budget.
My understanding of the way that it works is that you would not get all of your needs in year one, because that's just poor financial planning. Because if something were to happen where, again, just some other need shoots up, like you don't have any buffer within the next 5 years. And so you have needs kind of broken out a little bit over time. You put more in you still ask for the whole ask though within the override.
Right.
And then you take the buffer amount that you're gonna need for year 2, but you don't technically need for year 1, and you put that money in your contingency areas, right? So you're not using that towards salaries, and then slowly you kind of whittle that down in terms of like what you're putting to your contingency accounts. And so like you might start at 3 million, 4 million within the first year, and then as you get to year 5, similar to what we did last year, like we put nothing else into the last year into the kind of extra contingency budgets. And so that's usually how that works, just to build some protection within for the town's budget.
Right. So, I mean, I think, I don't know, I'm just kind of like just thinking like community member, like if we go, let's say we go for a $6.5 million override for schools, and then that only covers our level service budget, we would be forced to then go for another override pretty quickly, right, to make up to cover some of these costs from the implementation plan and any other increases and so on and so forth. So like, I think also like just to, I mean, if we do go for an override, like to kind of phrase it that, hey, this should last us for this many years, versus like doing another one in 2 years or less, like, because I think that's like the repetitive overrides, it's like, it kind of like, it's like poor planning a little bit on our part, just like perception. And I know we're trying to be sensitive to like the number, but at the same time, it's like, it's better for us to have a clear plan and get more support that way. I mean, I'm trying to stay optimistic.
Yeah, no, I mean, totally. There's no way in which we're gonna get a second override in 2 years.
Exactly.
Like, it's just not.
Yeah.
You're just at that point gonna have to cut services or not implement the implementation plan, right? That's just that is the reality you're gonna be in.
Other
So.
areas.
Okay. Well, I think also, I mean, I'm glad you guys are doing the teaching and learning sessions. I want to go to the Pierce one. I mean, it's nice to like be able to hear, just community feedback and like parent guardian feedback on like what's working, what's not, what they'd like to see. I mean, and just kind of have that feedback in as we're going through this process too. This is great. Thank you.
Anything else?
That's it for Finance Committee.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, what about the warrants?
Very funny. Okay, so policy.
All right. So I have, I think, wait, let me go back. Sorry. I apologize. What month are we in? December.
Yeah, we have a motion.
Yes, I know. Okay. So I'm going to make a motion to approve the second reading of the Milton School Committee Policy Manual, Section I. We had our first reading at our last meeting. And so do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Yes, thank you. That's it. I do at some point need to do a facilities advisory update from a couple weeks ago.
Still not on the.
That's okay, but that's fine. We didn't have much to share, so.
Oh, yeah, because we did talk about it, and we're looking at the calendar if a group met, as we
Oh,
talked
yes,
about at the
yes.
governance. If a group met between meetings, it's on here unless otherwise identified through. A group may not have met, but there needs to be a report. We can add that too if we. However, that I think is how we landed. In that
Yeah, just leave it as a
conversation.
default item. Just.
So I think we
Yes.
looked between the last meeting
Yeah,
and this
but
meeting.
that
But I know.
was
I'm just
because
saying.
we missed it
Yeah.
the time before.
Right.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
No.
Not really.
But I'm
I
just
mean,
letting you know, like that
thank
we're
you.
doing
I
that
don't
from
like us.
From now on.
Box
Yeah.
us out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna. Okay, I have
Seriously,
facilities
between
right
the logo
here.
and this, like,
No, she didn't use the logo.
Yeah,
Can we get back to that?
Okay,
That's it.
school building committee.
You took the last one, I can take it. All right, school building committee, we met the presentation of the big thing was the presentation of the updated cost estimate. Schematic design had moved forward, obviously, from the last cost estimate we got was in July. So they've done more design work, has been shared a little bit with y'all from Sean when he presented. And so we got an updated cost estimate, which I also shared with y'all and was discussed at that meeting. But ultimately, the construction cost was adjusted down from the one in July was estimated at $133 million, 133 and a half. The new one is just under 129 million. That's just construction costs. You then add the 30% for design costs. That's what gets the 133 up to the 173, and that gets the 129 up to 168, 167. It's about like a $5.5 million difference. Really, most of that came out of contingency. So again, like in earlier designs, you hold more in contingency in case things change and just because of unknowns. And so as things become more known, you just need less held in contingency. So essentially that means that I feel like the construction hasn't changed significantly from the July to the November enough that the cost went up. There were, again, some slight changes on certain line items and things like that, but when you look at it holistically, it's pretty flat. So the building itself is not necessarily costing less, but again, you just need that contingency can be cut down. So that's where that comes from, essentially. But that was the primary discussion. The other thing that we talked about a little bit further was just the MSBA, which we thought we were going to hear back end of November. That's what they told us in the site walkthrough. They lied to us because we have not heard back. And so they have a board meeting in December. I think it's December 12th is when their board meeting is. So we 100% will have to know by that meeting because that's a public meeting where they'll announce it. And they told us we'll know before that meeting, but maybe we're wrong. So talked a little bit about that timeline. Talked a little bit about, I think I shared previously, the OPMs are doing some assessment that the committee has asked for around just MSBA escalation, like what is the cost of if we get accepted with MSBA and going with them with the rebates, the funding we get from the state versus not going with MSBA, just to have that information, make sure we are sharing that, given that is a decision the town will need to make. And so talked about it a little bit, gave some feedback to the OPMs. Nothing else really to share on that. And then again, we are out of design funding. Arrow Street has done all that they said they would do. They've taken us through schematic design, gotten the updated, so there's really not going to be any further update on the design of the project until we achieve further funding to push that design forward. Anything I missed, Lynn?
Oh,
You got it.
Other districts haven't heard yet as well.
Oh,
At
okay.
least one other district that's in the running hasn't heard yet, so I think
That's
think
good
we're-
news, right?
No news is
We're
good news so far.
on track with everyone else right now, waiting to hear.
And so at
Feel
our
betrayed.
next meeting in 2 weeks' time, we will have school building committee with a vote on our agenda, most likely, because we are, whatever happens with MSBA, like, we're moving toward needing to take a vote as recommendations on the warrant articles for the February town meeting to register our opinions on those articles, so hopefully we'll have more clarity. We will have more clarity, but it will potentially make that another, like, more complicated set of decisions. So,
So would that be at our next meeting?
yes. I
So we
think
would
so.
vote, okay.
I believe so. I mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what happens with MSBA and if that somehow changes what school building committee chooses to do, right? They might
Yeah.
choose
Is
to
school
take a
building
different vote
committee-
on some different warrant articles, and then
School building committee meeting early that week of the,
still trying to figure out the exact
16th?
time, because again, we were expecting to have heard from them
yeah, okay.
more informally.
All right, we'll just have to stay on top of that. So we know what we need to do at what time
Yeah.
over here. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So approval of minutes. We have minutes from our governance retreat. So if people have had a chance to check those, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the Milton School Committee Governance Retreat held on November 25th, 2024. Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any edits or changes? Okay, all in favor? Okay, great, thank you. Next meeting, we have a bunch. We've got Milton High School Site Council, what has been on the list of things. Maybe they can, like, really work toward a nice, concise site council presentation. There's always
We
so
can work
much.
together.
There's
We can
always
work
so
on
much
it.
from them.
Yeah.
I mean, not from them, from all of our site councils that we really value and want to hear about. And we're going to have the calendar again. We're going to vote on that as we've discussed. We're going to have school building. Depending on what happens there, we may have a lot to discuss, a vote. We'll see what happens. We'll have policy report.
And facilities.
with-
Two facilities.
First reading of the
Be
next
two
section.
facilities updates.
And we'll have facilities for sure. And we'll have finance, and we'll hear about what's happening with the your joint meeting and whatnot. Anything else as of now? Okay, that will be a nice, we're gonna close this out before 10 o'clock. We used to try to end before 9 o'clock. We're trying to end before 10 o'clock now, and
We've had some meaty topics, though.
so
I think next week's going to be a long one.
We'll have to bring some coffee.
we'll just, yeah. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make the motion.
Okay. Second.
Second.
Okay, Selena seconds. All in favor? Okay. Thank you, everybody.